My name is Esther Miller. I'm one of the co-owners of this space. We have Jasmine in the black top and Jana in the brown top. They are twin sisters. They look alike. They're two of my business partners as well as part co-owners in this space. We opened this gallery and bookshop and part cafe 3 months ago, actually 4 months ago, going on 4 months, and our big goal with this space was to bridge the gap between artists and community and really find what it means to build culture here in Fort Worth, what it means to express, what it means to be a part of the community, being involved with that, and really just giving a space for emerging and established artists to interact with the rest of the community. So this is our first collaborative effort with Haven, who Tobias is the curator and owner of that non-locational curatorial service.
Yeah.
I'll let it explain better, but yeah, we're so grateful that he curated the show, bridging together the Dallas art community and artists and Fort Worth artist community and artists as well. So tonight, we're really excited to hear from all the 6 artists that are here. Thank you so much for coming here, and these are all artists that are very, I would say pretty established and beyond emerging, honestly, and have their own careers here in the DFW community, and we're so honored to hear from them and their story of art and the pieces that they have here in particular, and for you to get to know them, hopefully. So, housekeeping. We have wine and mezcal, kind of a lot of it.
Yeah.
So help yourself, here's some cookies too. Anything that we have, our house is yours, so feel free. Unfortunately, our coffee bar is closed, so if you need water or anything, just say the word, we'll offer that. Restrooms are in that hallway right to the right of Gifted. So the code is to the left door, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, super secure. If you forget that, just find any one of us and we'll give you the code. And yeah, this is very casual. I think as Tobias said, the mic is, I'll bring this to you if you have a question, and we have like an open dialogue session, I believe, so I might be handing this to you at that point. But otherwise, feel free to, you can come close, you can come close to the pieces. This is a very interactive space, open for all of us. So, thank you. This is Tobias.
Thank you so much, Esther.
You're welcome.
First off, I'm very blessed and grateful to be here. I've sort of envisioned doing something like this for a long time. And I think it's natural that I did it with these ladies here because, I've known them for about 5 years now. It's been a while. I used to work over here in Coffee a long time ago, and I now live in Dallas, so this sort of gets into what I want to achieve with this, which is, the title of the exhibition is Confluence, and I have 3 Dallas and Fort Worth artists here because I kind of want to open the dialogue about the collaboration and the authentic relationships that can be built between both cities. And at the same time, I always just want to highlight the work and the technique and the spirit behind the people that I admire, which is the artists that I've curated. So, we're going to be doing a talk, about 10 minutes with each artist. Obviously, like she was saying at the end of the conversation, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. I want it to be as engaging as it can be. But yeah, like I said, I'm very grateful to be here. Thank you everyone for coming out. We're going to be starting with Andrew Czap. For reference, his piece is the black and white photograph here. Untitled, we picked this piece together from an archive of images of his. And yeah, I think it'll open up a conversation on his work and his practice as a cinematographer and photographer at large. So, introduce Andrew. Yeah, so to start, I kind of wanted to just ask more so a broad question of your relationship to Fort Worth and kind of how that's affected your practice and kind of what that is, how that's inspired your work in general, if it has at all.
Yeah.
Do you want me to hold it or?
I'll just, this is more, it's okay.
Yeah, my relationship, I feel like to Fort Worth kind of, I grew up in Arlington, and so I was always kind of neighbors to Fort Worth, and so we kind of grew up here. We would sneak into the hotels and go try to find our way to the roofs and all that kind of different stuff, get into the hot tubs and pools. And so I always was here in Fort Worth, and then I moved here in 2017. And I would say, I think in 2018, I kind of started integrating photography into Fort Worth, I'd say for the first time. And a lot of that was just, I was living over off South Main at the time, and it was just, I would just walk the streets and photograph. And so that was really, I feel like, the first start to kind of integrating those two things. And a lot of it, I mean, in the South Main area, was like the older buildings, the textures there, and then, I mean, starting in 2018, launched a business here in Fort Worth as well, and so it's kind of become ingrained into not only photography, but then also like filmmaking work. And
sure, is that Prelude Films? Yeah. So maybe you could speak a little bit about Prelude Films and your professional practice with cinematography and how that's kind of inspired your photography, or maybe vice versa, if it's separate, maybe you could speak a little bit about that as well.
Yeah. So the cinematography work, I feel like kind of came out of, it started from like the photography side of things. And so in high school, I took a photography class. We had like 22 and larger, so it was all darkroom photography, and had a really great teacher. And he was the one that kind of inspired me to want to pursue something creative for an actual profession and not just into something non-creative. And so it's photography, and then out of there I went to school for graphic design, and kind of the way I describe it is I kind of got into film unintentionally. Mm-hmm. But I think the two go hand in hand, because film is oftentimes everything is orchestrated. It's very we're setting lights, we're blocking it all out. Like, it's a very controlled environment. And so I feel like with the photography, I try and take the opposite approach to that. It's nothing is controlled. It's just as you walk, you photograph what you see.
Yeah, and film sets and commercial work is far more collaborative, and it has a big structure to it, which is sort of why I wanted to put you in this space and kind of. I feel like a lot of photographers that I know, even myself personally. There's this clash between pursuing commercial work, getting money, trying to do client work, and then also having this personal practice. Like you were saying, that's very much so a solo and kind of introspective endeavor. And maybe that can get into the experience you had specifically with this photograph. Were you alone, or kind of how did it come about? How was that process?
Yeah, specifically for this photograph. What's funny, it actually was on a film set.
Okay.
But we were filming in a community probably about 15 minutes south of here, off of I-35. It was the Tejano community. And the director he had been living there for the entire summer, and he was just in a trailer and was embedded into that community, because I think he brought in one or two actors, and the rest of them were all non-actors from this Tejano community. And so we were filming at there was probably like 5 or 6 different families that lived there. There was a ranch. It was just this whole kind of structure where people just lived, and there was even, when I say they had not a farm, but they had were growing plants and different things there as well. And so this was just one of as we were filming, set up between shots, I just looked over and I was there. It wasn't placed by production or anything. It's just that was from the community.
And what did you shoot it on? What was from a technical perspective?
Yeah.
Were you shooting black and white film, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was a Tridex 400 and on a Nikon F3 with the 35mm lens. And this is at a period whenever 2018, I think, to 2020, I was just to kind of strip back the technical layer of filmmaking. I was shooting one lens, one camera, one stock, one way to develop. And so it's just none of the technical things mattered. It was just
get your content go running gun.
Yeah, and then even in this case too, it's I would shoot everything at f8. If it was sunny, it was at 1,000 of a like, and if it was into the sun, it was at 2,000, and if it was cloudy, it was 500. So it was
Okay.
like just try to remove every technical problem.
Sure. To get sort of back to like the idea of location and space, I wanted to ask you, we looked at a lot of photographs as far as before choosing this one, and there is, a lot of your work is obviously not in Dallas and Fort Worth. So how has your experience traveling and kind of experiencing other cultures influenced how you've seen Fort Worth in your hometown, and maybe how you want to hopefully change it? Has there been any sort of influence in that regard?
Yeah, I would say, I think one thing that I'm really thankful for is being able to grow up. I'd say in kind of some of the pivotal years of high school, had the opportunity to be able to travel overseas a couple times.
Yeah.
And one of those was like right in that realm of like really starting to dive into photography as well.
Yeah.
And I think all in all, I think most people can attest, like whenever you travel, it's just a weird thought that there's people on the other side of the world right now that are asleep or just now waking up. And yet we live our lives in a way that we don't acknowledge most of the time and think about them. And then beyond that, one of them was for a cultural exchange program as well. And so being able to develop friends and relationships with people outside of just like the tourist aspect of it, but having relationships that still extend to today with people that live on the other side. It's a interesting thing. I think all in all, it kind of one extends like empathy to being able to understand that, like the different backgrounds, and I mean just how fortunate we are to be here in America, but then two, just to reality that's like it's not like that for everybody either.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, I appreciate you speaking on that, just because, I mean, that's something that I've experienced as well, being able to travel and go to not only other cities, but places that I feel like when I get back home, I have like an appreciation of where, we're from. But I also hope that energy can be expressed to where we can change the culture in the way that, these ladies here are doing. So I think, I'm bringing that up to hopefully put that on everybody's mind that, people are only going to want to immerse themselves in our culture here in Dallas and Fort Worth as much as we change and express ourselves and what we want here. So I think that's very important. And obviously it comes down to the way we express ourselves through our craft and all of those things. So yeah, I really appreciate you, speaking up on that. So is there any questions you might have for Andrew about his work, or Austin?
Is there a reason why you chose the Nikon F3?
Yeah. I mean, I bought it because I wanted an SLR because I like rangefinders, but I liked more at this time the precision of like the SLR being able to frame and knowing exactly what your edges look like. And the F3 was just like the gold standard of photojournalism in the 80s, and so I just found one online that was recently cleaned and all good to go. And so about that, and then it was a camera I had with me at the time too, which is most of the time how is just what you have with you.
I just asked the question because Gordon Parks used that camera.
Okay.
And so I was wondering if you used it because of, you might have had an inspiration from somebody else, or?
The Gordon Parks reference.
Yeah, no, it wasn't out of reference for anybody else. Yeah. No, I'm a fan of Gordon's work too.
Did anybody else have any questions? Yeah?
Sarah, so that was not staged, correct?
Correct.
Did you, is it on a hanger? Like, it's good, the shirt is very big.
I think it has a pillow stuff in it.
Okay. And the bottle is there.
The bottle is there, yeah.
It's so intriguing.
Everything was already
Yeah.
staged, everything was already...
Yeah, I have zero idea what the backstory to it actually is.
Quite a mystery.
Yeah. And there was, this week actually, kind of in preparation for this, I went back and looked at like the negative for it, and it was, I think I photographed 3 different versions of it. One that was just wide, then there was this one, then there was one that was a little bit closer to it.
It's very thought-provoking.
What thoughts provoke you when you see it?
I I think of like history. I don't know, for some reason it brings slavery to mind, or just I think of like pioneers. I think of poverty. I think of change. I think of hope.
So cool. Wow, that's beautiful.
Did you have a question?
I did.
Yeah. What's up, man?
I know a lot of photographers have different approaches to their work where they take a bunch of photos and they select the best, and they're very careful with their shots. Which one do you lean into?
Good question.
So I think kind of backing up, like the way I approach it now is it's very like selective. It's you know, you might have to roll the camera for a while, but a lot of that stems from even the transition to shooting film, because I paid for college by photographing weddings, which I realized I never wanted to do again because it was just shooting thousands upon thousands. And so I loved like the intentionality of, okay, do I actually want to photograph this? And so I think it's still kind of that way of just, I think that's one of the most kind of valuable things that you have as an artist or a maker of any sort, is like, what is the intent behind what you're doing? And that's why I also love black and white. It's like you can shoot color and turn it black and white, but it's shooting in the sense of like, I'm only going to be shooting black and white. It's like you're looking for composition and light are basically two things that are making the image now.
Yeah, and in regards to black and white and just analog photography, I mean, there's such a density that you're not really looking for color, you're just looking for like shadows and texture and contrast, which I think, you just see differently when you're kind of in that perspective of trying to capture it that way. Also just, when you shoot analog, you just go slower.
Yeah.
So I'm sure you've had that experience of, especially when you're doing commercial work on, large film rolls. Yeah, I think going slower is a good way to get not only quality, photos, but it sort of helps you observe a little bit more passively and patiently.
I agree. I think one of the things that, kind of going back to like that blend of, there's cinematography and there's photography.
Sure.
Like being able to use it to practice. Like one of my favorite lines is, I kind of use it, not like a tagline for my life, but just like a way of living, but it's from the poet Marie Rilke, where he talks about learning to see, and just how things that like basically didn't have a place in his heart, like now have a place in there. It's because he's learning to see. And so that's a lot of it, I think, like from the photography aspect of it, is that process of learning to see.
For sure.
Yeah, just whether that's composition, whether it's light, whether it's the people that you photograph, or the circumstances that you photograph, whatever it might be, but I think that's at the root of it. The heart is like, how do you learn how to see? Because it's like you can see with your eyeballs, but that's different than actually like seeing people or seeing places.
For sure. Wherever it might be. Beautiful. Well, thank you, Andrew. Thank you so much. I want to next introduce Jana Renée, a good friend of mine. This is her beautiful piece over here, Bubble. If y'all can maybe see, it's right over here. So feel free to come closer if you need to. But yeah, me and Jana met, we've known each other for a little while. 2016 or so. When I was here living in Fort Worth, she actually had a studio, not even 5-10 minutes from here. Yeah, we became good friends, we collaborated on a couple projects, and I wanted her to be a part of this because, one, I feel like she can speak about Fort Worth in a way that not many people can. She's not only immersed in it, but also has really good relationships with a lot of very authentic and important people, actually. So yeah, thank you for being here, obviously. Yeah, maybe you could start with that, with your relationship with Fort Worth. I know you aren't from Fort Worth. You went to school in Boston, right?
Yeah, so I'm a Northeasterner for sure.
Okay.
But Texas has been at this point, the most place I've lived on and off. And yeah, Fort Worth is a really interesting place because I never thought I'd come back here. I never thought I'd end up with them here, and I've been here for 8 years. I have 25 public art pieces in Fort Worth. So essentially, like, I'm part of it now. And I can see it for what it is, and I appreciate it. I think it's frustrating, it's infuriatingly frustrating, and naive and steeped in history at the same time, and backwards, but also just like wanting to learn. And I think it's been a really nice place to like continue my art career after school, because I was working before school, during and after. And so like, yeah, Fort Worth is sort of, I think it's a really interesting and special place for art, because people are like, art? Tell me about it. and it's sweet, it's a very sweet thing. That's a very sweet thing about Fort Worth. Dallas can't say that. In Dallas, you're like, I'm an artist, they're like, oh. or in LA or New York, like,
Sure,
I'm an artist, they're like, oh. You go to like a sweet little Fort Worth and you're like, what do you do? And you're like, I'm a painter. And they're like, really? How about it? It's very sweet.
There is an answer.
Yeah,
There is
very
an answer.
sweet, little cowpoke. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think you need the innocence to encourage people who feel like the art world is kind of distant, you know what I mean? I think hopefully, by doing this and just kind of expressing ourselves, we can have people come and engage and experience it a little bit more. But maybe you could speak a little bit. Obviously, we have a canvas piece of yours, a figurative piece, but most people know you with your mural work, and you've been doing murals for like a while as well. How has your mural work like affected your practice from like canvas perspective? Or if it hasn't, like how has that kind of changed?
It's loosened me up, because my studio practice, which is like my torture and my passion, is like what I show less of, because the gallery scene, in my experience, was just like it didn't mesh with what I felt was like
the mural work
my
specifically?
authenticity. And so when I started doing murals, it was playful. Like all of the structure of like formal painting and the studio practice, it wasn't there. You're like under a bridge, you're like peeing under a bush, like going, oh, my projector doesn't work? Oh, there's no power in that outlet? Okay, so I'm just gonna draw it with chalk. And so it just like totally loosened up like what was such a structure. Like
Sure.
when I started painting, I wouldn't even like smoke, I wouldn't drink, I would just like sit there like sober in my practice, like intensely structured. And now it's like 7 years of mural painting, like I'm just loose about it, like I'm dancing around the studio, and I'm like, what if I move this way? And so it's like, and what I love about like all the artists here is like I see a lot of movement with their work, and so it's fun for my oil paintings, which tend to be like very structured, to be a part of like all this movement.
Yeah, well, I mean, it is structured, but I also feel like your paintings for me have a lot to do with sensuality and being in the body. So maybe you could talk specifically about this painting and kind of who and why you wanted to paint it, and then why you focus on sensuality specifically.
Yeah, well, I was absolutely obsessed with portrait art, and going to school in Boston, they were like, stop being so ordinary. And I was like, I don't think portraits are ordinary. I think people are the most beautiful, fascinating thing that we live for. But okay. And so I had like my social anxiety would be like I couldn't look into people's eyes until I was like 22. And so I would stare at people's mouths, and it was gross and sexy, and there's something in your teeth, and intimate. And for me, I was like, well, you can't make me stop painting portraits. You can't make me stop painting people. I'm just going to paint people more intimately and deeply than you're comfortable looking at. And so I just started like going to my girlfriends, and I was also like, Instagram had just come out because I'm old, and I was so fascinated with the thought that like people were saying, what are you women doing? You're totally objectifying yourselves. Like you're embarrassing yourself on this platform. And I was like, no. Anytime I've ever done a photo shoot, anytime I've ever been used as a reference, I had hated the pictures that were taken of me. And so this was my first ever series as an oil painter because I was an illustrator. And so I had been painting in oils for like a year when I did that. And I was fascinated with the idea that Instagram, for me, was like, no, we're taking the power. We're saying this is, I feel sexy. I can take this selfie. I can take this thing. And, this was all new, 2011, 2012.
Sure. Yeah.
And so I would call my girlfriends and I'd say, I'm gonna paint like a sexy close-up on your lips, but you don't have to take it close up. And I'd be like, put some lip gloss on. And with Malika, I was like, can you blow a spit bubble? And she was like, yeah. So she sent me like a photo, and then I would just sort of like zoom in on the intimacy of the picture. And it was so gross to me, but so sexy. Like, what is the boundary that we have here? It's like between like fluids and like ugh, but also And so I was always like kind of disgusted with what I was painting because like saliva and the sound of it and it's just gross. But also, so that was kind of, this piece was kind of like bordering between like what's gross, what's sexual. Like she's got a lot of spit in her mouth, like legit, like built all the spit up and like blew a bubble with her spit.
Well, I think the way it's painted, it's very beautiful. It doesn't come off gross or anything. I think it's a very beautiful painting. So with that in mind, I mean, I think it's still very well done. Yeah, does anybody have any questions for Jana?
Yeah, you talked about enjoying portraiture because you like painting people. You also talked about kind of taking ownership of the portrayal of women by creating your own art. What's kind of a piece of insight you kind of learned over the years through painting people or painting women specifically, something kind of about human beings?
The interesting thing about like a lot of women will have like facial movements that they go to for their pictures. And so when actually this is my muse, Cynthia here. She's my favorite person to paint. She hates having her picture taken. She's very uncomfortable. So basically like the thing that I love about painting people is like finding a moment and a movement between facial expressions, or like a deep breath, or I'll say like think of something that makes you smile but don't smile, and so I like to find. I don't know if I have deviated from the question, but yeah, just the beauty that I find in people's faces for me is like sort of like the in between expressions. And like the relaxed moment between thoughts is like that's what I want to look at. It's like a conversation, an intimate moment.
It's beautiful.
Does anybody else have a question for Jana?
With realism, do you find that you use a lot of references that you take, and are you composing when you're taking those camera shots, or are you cropping those specifically immediately?
All of that, yeah. With this piece specifically, with this series, I really wanted to work from selfies because I wanted to see what angles and what moments that the girls were comfortable with sharing, because for me it was like about empowerment. But typically I do sort of produce the image that I want, and I'll like Photoshop it and put it together because I hate it. And I'm so proud of like all the artists here. I can see that a lot of people aren't working from direct reference, and I am obsessed with that. But I have to work from direct reference. It's just the way my brain works. So yeah, it's kind of different every time. But for this one, it was like, that's the angle she took. And I loved it. I was like, yeah, good job.
Anybody else?
So you said that you often focus on people's mouths before we got comfortable with eye contact. Is that the reason why you painted a mouth, or are there like certain body parts where you find yourself drawn to paint more so because you're more comfortable painting them or uncomfortable painting
sometimes like I'm afraid to look at the body, even though I am a figure painter and I love the body. And like to me, like the most intimate conversation you can have with someone is like that moment when you forget, no one's looking anywhere, but you just find yourself in their words and in their mouth. And like, so for me, I was like, you can't tell me not to paint portraits. I'm gonna paint the most intimate portraits I can think of. Does that answer your question? Yeah, kind of.
Any other questions?
I have a question.
Okay.
Who are you like, I would kill to be able to paint them? Like, is there a person that you're just like, they make me come alive, like to be able to paint them would just be like incredible? Or have you already had that?
I mean, there she is. She had just bought my art, and I like went up to her, and I was like, I don't mean to be weird, but like I have to paint you. And she was like, and she didn't tell me until years later that she had just purchased my art.
Oh wow.
But we've been friends for like 7 years. But no, I don't think of it that way. Typically, it's like a person to person. Like I get really filled with passion without understanding why. And it's like about who they are and what they embody, and it's like it is person to person. There are people that I'm like, you know, like celebrities and stuff. I'm like, yeah, I could, but I don't have an interest because I don't know them.
Right. So the connection is what's important for you.
Yeah, and occasionally there is like you get intrigued by the look of something or someone, and you're like, oh, I like the shape of their lips. I'll try that, you know. But typically, like the most passionate paintings that I paint are of people that I know, the people that I connected with and creeped out before they let me paint them.
That's amazing. I love it. Very cool.
Okay, beautiful. Thank you so much, Jana. Next is going to be Nathan Butler. He's a photographer. His piece for reference is this beautiful abstract piece over here towards the back. And yeah, please welcome Nathan. Give him a round. So I guess I will start with how, I mean, you live here in Fort Worth, and how has Fort Worth influenced your work? How has Fort Worth influenced the way that you express yourself? And maybe you can speak a little bit about the city.
Yeah, so I've been in Fort Worth for a year, and in my year here, I've got a lot of warmth, Midwestern warmth, and what I've noticed about the people here is that there's very tight-knit communities that are very hard to find.
Yeah.
Because in the city, there's a lot of families, right? And that can kind of tie into the close-knit communities. But how that's influenced my work? Well, I'm an individual amongst this vast crowd, and I don't feel that. I don't feel the close-knit community or the inclusion that I'm supposed to get being in a big suburban center.
Sure. Yeah. So you also, you mostly do a lot of portraiture. How did you get into portraiture? Did you go to school? What was a way that sort of inspired you to start doing portrait photography?
Yeah, so I got into portraiture through my best friend in high school. So they brought me a camera and goaded me to use it, and I was like, okay, sure, I'll give it a try. And I did do that for a few years throughout high school, and I didn't really value photography. But after I graduated, I started to reach out through Instagram and to different people that were outside of my circle.
Yeah.
What I found through those portraits is that if you look into their eyes after you've taken a photo and you study it, let's say months after you've taken the photo, you get to see something about them that wasn't there when you took the photo. So what I mean by that is you take this photo and you look into their eyes, but you can't draw anything from that. However, looking at it months later, you can draw your own opinions about that said person. So really, what I love about portraiture is I get to study people and I get to look at them, how I saw them.
Yeah, kind of like a retrospective study.
Yeah, a very retrospective study on who that person was at that moment.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, I mean, and again, similar to Andrew, I really wanted you to be here, and specifically this piece, because we went through the same process where, you know, I knew I didn't want him to present a portrait photograph. I think that would have obviously been in combatance to the kind of aesthetic of what I wanted to express in the show. But I wanted him to just kind of bring me his personal work, and he showed me a selection of photos. Some were actually very personal, and there was some self-portraits in there, and similar temperaments that I think that, you know, we connected with.
Yeah.
But I think this one specifically stood out to me because, I mean, on the surface of it, it does not look like a photograph. I mean, it's a very abstract, obscure, mercurial kind of composition. And that's I mean, I love work like that myself. So I was like kind of picked at him, like, I think I want to go with this one, blow it up and you know, give it a breathing room. But maybe, I think the one thing that also kind of struck me the most about the piece was you told me of how you actually created the piece. So you spoke about a specific photographic technique called Mordancage.
Yeah.
And I believe you said it was French, correct?
Yeah, so Mordancage is this 18th century French technique, and it involves putting acid onto silver gelatin paper. So how I made that was that I followed the recipe of that technique, and it's a pretty simple process. It's like a chef baking bread. So
that's not simple. Bro, come on, everybody's trying to put a sourdough game. Like, you can't make that reference. Not
I actually made bread last week for the first time. This is clearly not bread, but so what I did was I poured acid onto silver gelatin paper, and as you might suggest, that it's made with gelatin. And as the gelatin rose up from that acid, lifting it up, I got my finger and I just etched out patterns onto it until I was fully satisfied with what I got. And obviously, acid is wet, so you have to wait a little bit for it to dry. As it dries, these color shifts start to happen from red to brown to black, and that's just through the course of time, let's say about an hour. And as soon as it dried, you get this mix and match of colors that really, you know, it just blends all together. So yes, it's like a recipe.
And the title of the piece is Eco-Death. How literal or how implicit is that as far as like what you wanted to express with the work?
Yeah, so it's called Eco-Death because when I made this, it was pretty emotionally charged. I won't go into deep detail, but I was going through a breakup, and I wanted to cope with that breakup by creating something because the person I was with was an artist, and I wanted to impress them.
We've all been there, bro.
But it turned into something else, so it was emotionally charged, and I wanted to depict the feeling or the emotionality of despair and ego-death, and those two are equally, well not equally, those two are closely intertwined. So
I would agree, yeah.
when you're feeling that feeling of, you know, deep sorrow, you cannot feel like yourself, it feels like you're a different person, and that's how ego-death happens. You aren't yourself anymore, you're just this person feeling these heavy feelings and trying to get through it. But on a lighter note, when I look at this, I get really happy because that's a different Nathan that I've seen. You know, in the past.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Time has passed and you can see it and kind of have an appreciation for the time and how you express it in that moment. No, I think that's great. I think it's beautiful, man. Yeah. I mean, is there anything else you would like to maybe add on specifically your personal practice? Have you been doing this specific photography recently, or has it maybe been something you've sort of set aside and kind of taken on different, you know, avenues?
Yeah, so there's two different iterations of this called death and life. Very philosophical terms if you think really deeply about it. But they follow the same process. They look very different actually because they're made with different time intervals. So
Okay.
this one took 2 hours.
2 hours? Wow.
Yeah, 2 hours, while the other two took less time. And,
Okay.
You know, time is directly correlated with the color that is being output.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Did you do it in a, what setting? Did you just do it in do you have like a studio, or what was it just kind of just in your home? Or?
I don't have a studio, so
Okay.
to create this I had to use sunlight, so I had to go outside into my backyard. At the time I was living at my parents' house, so I had the best space, you know.
Yeah, right, bro.
Yeah, so it was in my backyard. I used the sun to create this, and while you could use a lamp, there's nothing better than the sun.
Beautiful. Yeah. Thank you. Does anybody have questions for Nathan about his photograph and the process of how he created it?
So when you were describing the process, you talked about dragging your finger around the piece, and I know it's not going to be random. What kind of things influence the way you're designing pieces of paint?
So what influenced me was the unpredictability of the gelatin as it was on top of the, extended body of the acid. So it's very hard to control, and I used my finger to control that. And think about a piece of paper on top of water, and it gets very wet, and it's very pliable. So it can be manipulated into any sort of shape possible. And I used my finger because that's all I had available.
Does anybody else have any questions for Nathan?
How many iterations of that did you do, or is it just one and done?
So I said iterations, about 4 or 5. So there's test runs that go, because it's very unpredictable, the outcome. So you get any kind of shape possible. But the other 2 iterations, I used the same process, but with different time.
Kind of on that note, one of the things, I love that piece because it, to me, is very cosmic. And I love that you use the sun as your source to create that, because I feel that the sun's energy in that piece. But aside from that, there is a mark on the top right corner of that, kind of like a hairline. And I know that sometimes, it sounds like it was a very wet process, or dust and dog hair. I don't know, like grass, what can become a part of your art. And I know some artists leave those quote-unquote imperfections or chance things into their art. Was that something that you left intentionally there, or not? I'm just curious.
That's a good observation. Yeah, there are bits and pieces of grass and dirt on top of it. While it wasn't intentional to leave it there, I felt as if it wouldn't really show up as I thought it would. But you've seen it.
Yeah. I've seen it.
Is it also not when you're scanning it? Is the dust and the dirt from the scan? Could that potentially have been what it was? Because when you're scanning photos, you want to take get the dust off of
Yeah, it could definitely affect it. I make sure to clean the scanner as I take it.
Yeah.
So the original size of this piece is actually 8 by 10. It's been enlarged because I think that size does not do it justice. It's definitely meant to be viewed like this size. But I didn't have really too much control, I have to be honest. I just really followed the formula and tried my best to create a shape out of it.
Beautiful.
I think it's cool.
Any other questions for Nathan? Austin?
Do you enjoy the process? Because I know that a bunch of artists sometimes don't actually enjoy the process of making art.
Okay, I don't enjoy the process. Yes, because there was a bunch of failures that happened. Sometimes you get the paper and the gelatin will just fly right off, and then sometimes there will just be complete darkness, and that's not really great to see. A lot of failures, but it really makes up when you actually see something out of what you've created. So I hope that answers your question.
Anybody else?
One question. I don't know if you kind of just answered it, but you said there was 4 or 5 iterations that you did, and I know that this, abstract art, it's so subjective. So, what to you was this is the one compared to the 4 or 5 that you already did?
Yeah, so that goes back to emotionality. What I came across is the study of human emotionality. We have a vast amount of emotions that we feel every day, and that can be either a frown on your face, or rage would be like the aftermath of breaking a vase. So what I saw here was my despair that I felt at the time, and that really influenced what I saw there. And what I see is a face of myself.
Wow.
But there are other iterations under different names, and they all represent a feeling that we all feel.
So cool.
Beautiful. Thank you, Nathan.
Yeah.
I really appreciate you. Thanks for coming. Next up is Djay Chung. His piece for reference is actually the first piece right by the door. And maybe y'all can move a little bit, give people a little bit of sight of the piece.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, so thank you, DJ. Thank you for being here. Please sit down. We've recently met formally. I met you at your studio when I was coming to get this piece, probably about 2 or 3 weeks ago. But I've known about DJ's work for about 4 or 5 months now. Austin actually introduced me to his work just kind of in passing, and then he had a solo show at the Fort Worth Community Arts Center. If you're not aware about it, it's a very it's a community-based project. It's right to the left of the Amen Carter Museum. Beautiful show. That's where I saw this piece here, and really admired your work. And so it's a pleasure for you to be here and speak about your piece. Yeah, I guess I would like to start with your background, where you're from, your origins, and kind of how you found yourself in Dallas as in the 10 district and you being a working artist there.
Right. I'm from South Korea, but I came to Dallas about like 10 years ago, and I'm working in the architect farm as a civil engineer for a couple of years, and then I moved to Boston to study psychology of fine art, and then I came back here, and luckily I've been able to pursue my career as a full-time artist. Very beginning from after my graduation, and I've been actively involved in the artist community, like huge artist community, like a Continental Gym building in development. They used to be a big factory, but we used to have like 50 artists in there. But we all kicked out, and we kicked out actually. And now I'm in the team district, and we have like 30 artists in there. So like those kind of working environment actually gives me the chance to like discussion about art.
Sure. Yeah.
Like always discussion about art and like exchange ideas too.
Yeah. So would you say you've been very it's been very fulfilling in that regard? You've met a lot of people in Dallas that have affected and inspired you in some way. Did it inspire your work technically, or is it more so from the point of your spirit and kind of how you express yourself?
An aspect to seeing the art and the literature aspect.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, because I've been in the United States for like just 10 years, so like it was kind of new to me, and the art is kind of new to me too. Like when I was an architect, I never went to the museum.
Really?
Never.
Okay.
So like it's
just focus, studies.
Yeah, so it was kind of surprised that I became an artist.
Okay.
Yeah, working in Dallas.
So you probably didn't start painting until you went to Boston.
Yeah.
Gotcha. So how did that affect, or how did you get inspired? Was it a specific artist, or was it school in general, or?
No, after graduation, I've been applying when I graduated school. But I've been accepted, but like I decided to travel more because I had keen interest like in the events happening in the world. So I just gave up on the graduate school and I started traveling to refugee camps around the world and volunteering in refugee camp and volunteering in the homeless shelter, or like also interested in the issues faced by immigrants.
Yeah, so I mean I feel like that gets into this specific piece here. I mean, you told me that it was very much so inspired by a mission trip you took. You went to Haiti, right?
Yeah, Haiti.
Yeah.
It's 2022. But I'm not like it's more like an interest in about people.
Yeah.
Like it's like circumstance, like and the resilience in dealing with like those kind of struggles. That's what I'm interested in. So I talk a lot of people with the refugees and having that kind of struggle. So witnessing like from that, I can say like I saw like people's anxiety, and anger, and frustration. But also, I found like I can say what I can say. I found like profound enlightenment in their like determination of keep going. You know?
Sure, after all of
Yeah. So like I got inspired by that from my trouble. I started painting about it. Here I am.
maybe you can speak a little bit technically. I mean, a lot of your pieces have, you know, they're landscape pieces, but I think that stands out is the figurative pieces, like, you know, elements in them that are actually more abstract and kind of mercurial. So why do you choose to have these figurative pieces in as the centerpiece of the work? Is it a specific individual? Is it a spirit? Or are you what are you trying to convey with that element of your work?
Sort of like from my experience, you know, from my experience, I start questioning myself about how I can find myself in this work, you know. Like those kind of questions, like how I, you know, gives inspired change to my work and offer like a new perspective, like the rest of us in this work. You know, those kind of questions. So I found, so that kind of question makes me think about how I can express inner side of the human being.
Yeah. And is there any specific, because you know, I read your bio, your statement on your website, specifically about the Code Red series.
Okay.
And I saw that you referenced a philosopher named Maurice Merleau-Ponty. Yeah. So has that literature and his ideas affected your work?
Oh, a lot actually. Like all the philosophers actually I admire. Because but Merleau-Ponty said like more about the body and the environment.
In perception and how you engage with the environment and how you
so
see.
Like, those kind of theories actually get me inspired. So.
And I'm sure you use that temperament in your practice, like the bodily experience that you have with your work in the studio.
I do a lot of meditation, like starting from my work, and I don't usually sketch. I just start
freebase. I should have said that.
Yeah.
Keep going.
Exactly. So like those kind of practice from like when I went to Greece in the refugee camp, actually I tried to take a photo of the people, and the armies are there, and they actually took my phone and erased all the photos.
Really?
Yeah.
Where?
So from that experience, I started practicing like just imagination, like image.
Yeah.
To the canvas. So like from that experience, that gave me the direction.
So you said it's more of a meditative practice before you start going in it. Would you say that kind of gives you a sense of energy before you go into the painting? Is that kind of what you're hoping for, or is it more of just about kind of getting space from the work before you kind of go into it?
Oh, yeah. So, I mean, you're talking about the message.
Well, not necessarily the message, more so about, like, you know, we talked about the bodily experience of, you know, experiencing your practice in painting. Yeah, I guess the question is more so, do you meditate from a physical perspective to kind of get more into the body, or is it more from the conceptual perspective?
More about the conceptual and the story.
And the story, got you. Okay.
When I go to the like camps or like helping people, you know, I just talk to people a lot because I stay there for 3-4 months every time I go there, and I teach like art classes for the kids, and like those kind of relationship actually. I try to remind them, remember those kind of stories and energy.
Sure, and bringing it into your work when
yeah. That's the process of my work.
No, I think that's great. I think it's amazing. Yeah. Does anybody have any questions for DJ Jana?
Yeah, DJ. I know you went to school in Boston. I'm curious. I know you said you did relief in Haiti, but when you say Boston, like there's so much of American history there and architecture. So I was wondering, like, first, what school did you go to, and second, like, how did the history in Boston and the architecture like affect your practice?
That's an interesting question. I went to the Tufts University, so I could do the dual degree program. I think that's the only school I could find. So I did the psychology of fine art there, and through that I didn't thought about becoming an artist actually. Yeah, I was going to be more like a therapist. So that was like a totally different direction. But like, yeah.
They're similar.
Yeah.
That's similar. But in Boston, the culture, I'm really inspired by culture in Boston too, because there's a lot of schools in Boston.
Yeah.
And they have almost every week they have lectures from really famous people coming there and talk about like this kind of social problems and stuff. So I've been engaging with that all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that really gives me a lot of ideas too, and try to see the different aspect of the like social problems. But that's why it's kind of hard when I make the process of my work is just I'm always questioning how I can make a balance between like the contextual like meaning and visual aesthetic. That I'm questioning myself all the time. It's really hard because you're dealing with like social problems. It's very sensitive too.
Yeah.
So it's hard, but I mean that practice has really given me insight to do this kind of things.
Yeah. Does anybody else have any questions, DJ?
Yeah, actually, I kind of responded to the architecture as well and getting a different perspective. So obviously the setting of the painting is a cathedral, and you talked a little bit about some of your inspiration being from these mission trips that you've gone on. Is there a religious and or spiritual element to your work? How does that kind of
Not really, not religious. I have no religious, but that painting behind that story is like when I went to Haiti, I met my friend is working the Doctors Without the Border, and he's volunteering in Haiti at the time, and he invites me there, and I talked to the pastor actually who lost his church, and that's the behind of that painting story. And yeah, so I try to bring those kind of atmosphere when it's that earthquake scene. That's why I don't usually work with the texture, but I kind of try to bring you guys into that.
Yeah, I think that's a very specific detail of the piece that like I personally enjoy is the texture of the thickness of the painting.
Yeah.
I mean, you could have easily kept that away and sort of, with the abstract strokes and the different hues of the browns, like could have still simulated the destruction of the space. But I think your willingness to put that there is like, it's a very well, curated choice. Yeah. Does anybody else have any questions?
Is the color or like the middle formation, does that represent anything in the middle of the Just like what inspires it?
It's kind of hard to say because it's like a biomorphic kind of shape that I try to express more like an inner side of human being and inner side of a human being. And, when I heard the story about him, it was really inspiring too, and he's trying to rebuild that church and those kind of willpower. I try to express through those kind of biomorphic, shapes. So, yeah, I didn't think about the color, but it's just visual aesthetic. Like I said, I try to always like that kind of consideration between like contextual meaning and visual aesthetic. Because art has to have like visual aesthetic.
Yeah, it does.
I'm
Yeah.
thinking, so.
It's
Yeah.
beautiful.
Thank you.
Anybody else before we move on? All right, beautiful. Please give a round of applause to Djay. Next, I would like to introduce Zarina Karapteyan. Thank you for being here.
Of course.
How are you?
I'm great.
Good. So again, reference for Zarina's piece. This piece in the center here is called Mind Manifesting Matter. I think me and you kind of came to get this piece over just a conversation that we had. I think we were more so trying to figure out what was good for you to kind of present this show. And I wanted it to be sort of a centerpiece to kind of like envelop the whole space, because as you can tell, the curation is very much so about texture and kind of having a thickness to certain pieces and paintings that I personally like to work. And I mean, obviously this piece represents that very well. But before we get into maybe the technicality of the piece, maybe tell us a little bit about where you're from and how Dallas and your relationship with people here has affected you and maybe influenced you in any way.
Yeah, okay, so I was born in Armenia, and then we came here when I was 1 year old. So we were escaping war. So my first relationship with Dallas was community. So the JCC took us in, and so it feels like ever since then, like the community is just...
The JCC, what do you...
Yeah, it's a Jewish community center.
Okay.
So they sponsored us and brought us here and took care of us, but I'm a Buddhist, and so I've gotten to know a lot of different communities, and I feel like Dallas is so great at that.
Yeah.
And, you know, yeah, that's the beginning, but even now, 29 years later, it still feels really community driven. And so my relationship with building, firstly, my interest in art has always been super supportive. And then now as an adult with a career in art, it also feels like, it's kind of like, okay, what are we doing? How are we gonna make these things happen? So
Yeah.
I feel like Dallas really has that, like how can we get you where you want to go? Energy.
Sure.
You know?
Yeah. And I mean, there's a lot of, I mean, specifically you said you came here into a Jewish community and all of that, but maybe speak to a little bit about like the artistic community that
Yeah.
you found and kind of how you started painting, or maybe you started in a different craft. Like, how did that actually come about?
So when I was like around 12 years old, my parents put me in formal painting classes. And like, we did not have money or anything like that, but it was like, what do you want to do? And I was like, well, I want to be a painter. And they were like, okay, you're going to a Russian guy. So I studied under like a Russian teacher for at least a decade. And so that was my whole training, was formal painting for the first 10 years. We studied still lifes, and like I painted cow skulls out of oil paint. I was like a 14-year-old who was super pissed about it, you know. And I was like, I want to do something fun. And he's like, we can do the fun later. And now, you know, when I went full time, he was right. You know, now it's like I had all these skills, and this is an abstract painting, but a lot of the work I'm known for in Dallas is more of my technical, traditional art.
Sure.
So bringing this piece here is like really exciting because I can start to show a little bit more of the abstract work that I'm doing, which has also been really like enjoyed by the community. And so the community has really given me a lot of opportunity to do shows and to make art, and everybody's just been great. Like, it's been an awesome experience painting in Dallas and getting to know Dallas painters, you know.
Yeah.
Like, it's really cool.
Well, I mean, I've sort of experienced this a little bit myself, but I think maybe your experience with starting very formal and technical has given you a foundation to branch out into more abstract ways of expression, where, I mean, I think rightfully so. I mean, sometimes people who do abstract work don't start from a technical standpoint, and there can be this kind of like, I don't know, maybe arrogant or kind of, you know, a little bit pompous kind of like, I'm doing something abstract, I'm trying to do something conceptual of that nature. But I think in your case it's different, because when you know you can create something very technical and very like beautiful and structured, you taking a step back from that is probably a sense of freedom that you got, to where you can just give yourself this kind of like surrealist kind of expression,
Right.
which what I really see in this piece specifically.
Right.
Maybe you can talk about when you had the idea about this piece and kind of what, inspired this more abstract kind of, conceptual perspective.
Right. So when I was doing all the technical painting, I was like, this is taking a lot of time. And if anybody's painting like a portrait or a figure, anything, you're like, gosh, this is taking forever. And I was like, I'm a little impatient. I do want to make more expressive art, but I don't want to feel like I'm cheating the audience. And I was always trying to work from a place of like trust with the people watching my work and viewing my work. And so I think the fact that I did formal training, people like will sit with me and listen to what inspired the piece a little bit more closely.
Sure.
Yeah. And so there was just a season of life where I was just picking up every material and playing with it, because I was like, I want to be making art with fun things. I don't want to be bored in the studio. And so picking up sand and plaster and different, materials was just like exciting. And I always wanted to build a career based off of what I enjoyed making. And so, with that as kind of my inner compass, I always wanted to go travel and make art like in the environment.
Sure.
And
Not
that was
outside of the
always
studio.
Outside of the studio, because I was like, man, I know how to do all these things. Why don't you just give me a box of stuff and see what I make? Like, drop me off somewhere in the world and like, let's see what happens. Because I also don't really repeat myself very often. And so I really wanted to make a big painting inspired by my trip from Iceland. And so that piece is inspired by that trip specifically. So I went out there, made some work, brought that back into the studio, and then I made the pieces from that reference.
So is there actual sand, black sand from Iceland?
A little
Probably
bit,
a little
just
bit.
a tiny bit, not
That's
the
a
whole
lot.
thing.
That's like
yeah,
a-
I would never do that, guys. But I did do that in Iceland, like with little pieces, and so that was kind of where the idea was born. Went out there. It was like 30-degree weather. I loved it. It was like I was getting my butt kicked. It was awesome. Like it was raining, and I love it. I don't know, there's a little crazy part of me that's like, okay, I should be asleep. It's 10 o'clock, the sun's still out, and it's freezing, and I'm out here playing with sand and paint. Like, this is insane,
So were they more, I guess it was more studies that you were doing out there?
Yeah.
Kind of like, were they small canvas works? Or
Little orbs, little circle
little
canvases,
orbs,
yeah.
little circle canvases.
Yeah,
Okay.
and so then, I came home and looked at the pieces, and there was little twigs and like different rocks in it, even though it just had like one black field. I was like, that's really cool, because like in the moment it just had one color.
From a vantage point.
From a
that's like-
vantage point. And so this piece, from a vantage point just looks black, and the closer you get to it, you see all the special little moments represented by crystals and semi-precious, jewels and stuff like that. So little twigs, little pieces, but you have to look closely at it, because I wanted to bring that memory into the piece where you're like, you gotta get really close with this earthly element to see what's inside.
Well, also I think the scale. Of
Yeah,
it
the
now,
scale
too.
is great.
The
Yeah,
scale
I love big work. I think big work is really fun.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So, how long did you think it took you to do this piece? I know you said you were kind of experiencing this kind of sense of impatience.
Yeah.
Was it a long process, or was it just kind of very?
It's kind of both, right? You could say like the process began with the idea,
Sure,
and then it had to go, make the work that could fund the trip, and then the trip had to, manifest, and then I had to bring all that back, and then 2 years later I had to have a wall that a big canvas could sit on, and then it was like all the elements had worked itself out. And I like to be a very strategic artist. Like I don't like messes, really. So it's like if I'm gonna make a mess, it's gotta be like 2 or 3 days at the most. So this piece only took about 2 or 3 days.
Okay.
Yeah,
That's actually a quick turnaround.
Yeah, because I'm just like, I knew what I was doing, so I was able to strategize my time
For sure.
and energy, and I like the finished product. So yeah.
Beautiful. Does anybody have any questions for Zarina? Yeah, you.
What elements of your classical training and practice do you find most seep into your abstract work? Because it's obviously not moved away from it because you spent all those years doing it. What things do you find?
That's a great question.
I think the intention and focus and the planning goes a lot into my abstract work. If you do technical formal painting, you have to think about it before you even put paint on the canvas.
Sure.
You have to really consider your materials and what you want it to look like is always kind of in the front of your mind, because if you're painting realism, you're like, it's got to look like what I want, So when I approach abstract painting, I really try to make the end product look as closely to what I'm imagining, with like a percentage reserved for like the moment. So I feel like that's kind of my application of that.
Yeah, just be more of my questions very so it's just, I love this. It's so sensory, it's so tactile to me. Like, I did not touch it, but I wanted to.
Oh, you can touch it.
So yeah, it's like the first thing that jumped out at me was how sensory it was. Especially, it's very sparkly.
Yeah.
Was that just like a little moment of joy? You were like, let's make it sparkly. Or like, what was that about?
It was an accident, because it's like you see sand for what it is, and then, when you're in Iceland and you're in a black lava field, which this is really inspired by those moments of me being isolated in a black lava field covered in sand. And then the sun comes out and everything just sparkles. And you realize light has so much to do with material, and you can see the material in such a new way. So for me to use sand, not only does it bring me joy to sprinkle things like that it's silly and fun and kind of childlike, but it does make my hands happy. And so I'm going to make art that makes my hands happy, and then it also gets to remind me of that moment. And it also can help, it plays with your eye, not only with the light, with the texture. There's just a lot that can happen with sand. So that's why I love using it in my work. Yeah.
Kelsey.
I told her I was going to ask questions. So this doesn't have anything to do with this piece necessarily, but it's you overall. I know that like on your Instagram, you've been posting a lot about how you didn't get accepted into art school way back in the day.
Yeah.
So how does that, I feel like as artists, like we like to flaunt like, oh, I got this degree, this fine arts degree, that type of thing, and like that's a sense of pride and for whatever it means, right? But it doesn't really mean much. But like how did that experience shape you? Because a lot of people would have felt really beaten down by that, but you're still doing work.
Yeah.
So how did that experience shape you?
So I did go to art school for a year, and you have to get accepted. So you do like classes, and then you have to do a review. And they literally wrote on my sheet, "We don't care that you know how to do technical painting. We want to see your ideas." And I thought, well, okay, whatever. And then the next year I applied again with a new portfolio, and it was still too technical. But I was 22 years old, and I had some sort of knowledge there, right? But that's ridiculous. I'm 22 years old. I don't have enough life under my belt to have enough ideas.
Sure. Yeah.
I haven't even read through all the art history books. I don't know anything about life. And so but I knew how to paint. And it was a really tense moment to have quit. But the same day I failed art school, I got a $5,000 check to do a mural. So I just followed the money at that point. I was like, okay, I'm gonna follow the money and see what happens. And so that was definitely the first step into moving into my career. And sometimes it's just, that's what it is a check,
Yeah.
I quit school after that. Yeah.
Does anybody else have any questions? Yes?
Hi. So I just wanted to add on to what he said. I studied geology, so when I saw this, it's like, oh my god, geology. And is there a reason why you went to Iceland specifically? Did that kind of resonate? Did it kind of inspire you to make this painting because Iceland is so heavily based on nature?
Yeah.
Okay.
All of both, yes. It's like when I traveled before to all these places. I spent the first 2 years of my career broke, but okay, I'm gonna go see the world. That's what you're supposed to do, right? And then when I always wanted to go to Iceland because it's the newest body of earth on Earth, right? And so it's just an active plane, and it's just all new Earth, and you're just like, oh my god, this is so cool. So all that black sand is just lava, you know,
Yeah.
crushed up lava. It's awesome.
Underwater volcanoes.
It's so cool. Yeah, and there's a good book here. There's an Iceland book here, so there's some good references.
Oh yeah, there is.
Yeah. So yeah, it
Please
definitely
purchase the
inspired
book.
me.
Please purchase
She does not get a percentage of the sale.
Not the book, but the piece. Yeah.
But the book is great, and it shows the vastness of Iceland, and it's this like small part of the earth, but it has so much energy. And so finding a place that has a ton of energy was the goal.
Sure.
And coming back and trying to make a piece based off of that was, you know, exciting. So.
Yeah. Beautiful. Thank you so much, Zarina.
Thank you.
Please give a round of applause. We have one more talk. It's with a very good friend of mine, Austin James Hunt. For reference, please give him a round of applause, please. So for reference, ladies, this is Austin's piece here entitled Portrait of a Modern Man. So yeah, I mean, maybe again I would like to start with your experience being a Dallas-based artist and kind of your practice. You know, when I met you, you showed me your studio, and I had a shared studio space in South Dallas. We were kind of in the midst of this kind of like very sporadic and kind of DIY space, which I think was a very like, I wouldn't say formidable, but like engaging and, you know, energizing time for me personally. And when I met you, you know, I think your work immediately struck me as something that was speaking on something that was very familiar to me. But again, how does that experience being in Dallas and kind of being here and being from Texas is like, you know, express who you are, if that makes any sense?
I don't know, because in the paintings I'm trying to represent how to access the soul rather than myself and my surroundings.
Sure, yeah.
Like obviously the surroundings help me go back inside because I've done a bunch of traveling and I'm a very introspective person. I like being alone. I like having small discussions with people, like very one-on-one. I'm very just weird about that. And it's just what I
Sure. Well, I mean, I think frankly, it's good to even say that, you know, being in Dallas or being in a city or whatever, you know, that shouldn't necessarily always be the forefront of what it is that someone does or how they express themselves. I mean, it sort of goes into what I want Haven to be about as well, which is having the spirit of like a non-locational kind of sense of being, where, you know, you're tapping into, like you're saying, the soul or your spirit, and most of the time those are very like interpersonal experiences that you have, whether yourself or with people in your intimate space. And, you know, oftentimes those things can create works that are just completely separate from its environment, which I really enjoy personally. I really enjoy creating something that doesn't really have anything to do with a location. It has a lot to do with more so the spirit or the idea or the conceptuality or the technicality behind what it is you're trying to express. I mean, this specific piece reminds me a lot of your earlier work, and it's very technical. So maybe you could go into the technical aspect of it, but also maybe a little bit more into what exactly you mean about, you know, trying to express the soul or in that nature.
Well, for the technical aspects, I mean, it's, you know, it's a lot of planning out before, and it's really kind of annoying to do so. Because because I started with photography, and that's what brought me to Dallas.
Okay.
And so I started with photography, came here, did that for a long time, traveled, blah, blah, blah. God, started painting, didn't know how I really wanted to do it, and then I ended up finding a method of painting that works, and then I like taking ideas as far as I can. Like, I chose a square. I put the square to the test and just pushed it as far as I can. I mean, I can still go farther than
Sure.
that, but
Yeah.
there's like 5 squares in between each of these, and
Now-
it's very.
Yeah, is this like a stencil process, or are you creating something in beforehand? Like, how exactly? Or you don't have to you also don't have to give that away either.
I mean, no, it's a bunch of rulers and straight lines.
Rulers and straight lines. Okay, beautiful. Yeah.
Like I make it on an iPad before, if that helps.
That's what I'm saying. Like, and it's sort of a process of getting the geometry of it first, and then getting it to the practical, which takes your own personal technique into account. Yeah. So, what about this specific piece? Do you think speaks to you, or would you like to kind of express it? Why this piece here specifically?
I think it just represents where I am in life. Like, it's like a portrait, but it's also these ideas that I've been playing with, like how you see on the background it's a black to a white, and there becomes this like grid that comes out. Or in the opposite, I love playing with contrast. I don't know why I've always been this way. Love contrast, and duality is a big part of like our language. So I really wanted to play with that as well. And then I just did this, and it really, I never knew what it was about until I talked about it here.
Really?
Enough. Like,
Okay.
There's times when I don't know.
Sure.
Like I just make things that I have to make this because if it stays in my head, I will become depressed, and I have to just keep making it.
You have to get it out. It's an emotional expression that you have to just kind of keep doing. And yeah. How would you say it fits or doesn't fit within your other body of work? Like, do you?
Well, I mean, I only have 2 like paintings with a figure.
Sure, because a lot of your other works are more geometric, large scale, and yeah.
And this is smaller than what I usually do.
It is, yeah.
Usually be about 72 by 72 inches. But yeah, I mean, I took this photograph, honestly, of one of my good friends, and I wanted to do like homage to him because he's really inspired me. Because when I was making the early series of this work, it's all about music, and he's also a musician. So it really plays a part. He would tell me about things about music that helped drive like me and helped make the paintings.
Beautiful.
And then I also, to me, I see like there's a bunch of vibration from it. There's a lot of movement without having to have someone there. Like it's just a silhouette of a person. It's not, there's no eyes in it. There's nothing that, I just wanted it to feel real and to feel like either someone's watching you from like around the room, like figurative paintings, that's like the realness is what people look for.
Sure.
And in abstract work, they want life.
Yeah.
And so that's what I think I accomplished here because it does enough for me, and then when I ask people about the work, it does a very similar thing. Like again, there's things that I didn't intend to create with this. Like again, the lines that come through all the corners, like that is only because the colors work together. It's not, but then it's weird because it goes into like free will and how I don't believe in it.
So you don't believe in free will?
No.
No. So do you think you did that based off of your own sense of not autonomy, but a feeling of more subconscious, which I think you can feel that in the piece. You know what I mean? You can feel a sense of, even like what you said, it's like you're expressing yourself from this need of almost unwillingly, like you have to do this, like you have to express yourself this way. This is where I don't believe that there is no free will, but I will also entertain the idea in the sense that a lot of creative people, or when you have a creative inclination or desire, it does feel like it's coming from this place of like, I have to do this. Like there is no question about expressing myself in this way. And I think that from your work, you can feel that, you know what I mean? And that's one reason why I very appreciate your work. And I appreciate you being honest about that, because I mean, it just sparks up the more philosophical question of why we are creating in general, or why we're even engaging in these kinds of conversations, because, again, sometimes even finding myself here, it's like I feel like I've just sort of, became myself, and, the interests that I have, and, the literature that I've read and the people that I've, put myself around has sort of got me to this point of feeling like I want to express not only my internal, expression, but also see how I can extend that within you and within everybody else. And I will be honest, I'm very happy to be here with you because, again, me and Austin have been friends for a while now. I have a really good relationship with him, and it just means a lot for you to be here, because we've had countless conversations about
and the same
about free will, and then things got heated, and then I was like, oh my gosh. But that's why it brings me joy, because I'm having this conversation in the midst of you guys. It's very fulfilling for me. So I really appreciate you, being here and expressing that to everybody.
I appreciate you making this happen.
Yeah, man, yeah, for sure. Does anybody have any questions for Austin?
Oh, free will.
So you talked a lot about it's very emotive work, but it's also very technical. Do you find when you finish a piece, you use it as sort of like a litmus test of how you were feeling during it? Does that change over time as you've worked with the piece for longer? How do your emotions tie with the piece when it's made and afterwards?
Well, when I'm making it, it's more so, again, like an emotional release that I don't know that I'm needing to do. But then I look at it late. I'll look at pieces months later, and then I'll actually figure out what they mean. Because sometimes you just, as much as I wish that I could know exactly what it means, I need a discussion around it. I need to talk about it, or to even just examine it for hours and hours. Because I remember I just stared at this one for hours and hours because it was staring back at me. So I'm trying to understand this like subject-object orientation. Is it like real? Is this more real than real? It's just, it proposes so many questions that I really don't even know how to answer. And it's just, that's what I enjoy about it, because it's engaging. It's not just like a flat piece of art in my eyes. But it's board easy, and it's, I don't know, it lights up in a way where I'm like, oh, I need to put attention here.
Sure. Nathan, you got a question?
Yeah. When you dove into your subconscious, what did you experience while you were making this?
I don't remember. It was a while ago, to be honest. But when I look back at it now, it's like that it's really nice that I can figure out, like, I'm truly trying to narrow down what it is, right? And then again, I can figure out that I wanted to try and touch the soul. Like, I've never even believed in a soul. I never believed in God, and then I started believing in God, and then I believed in, that we have souls, so that's another just interesting aspect. And then there's just there's weird parallels in it that's even hard for me to talk about. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
Jana?
Yeah, so you said you do a lot of geometric work and don't often put like organic forms that we said, like, or people in it. Like, how many pieces have you incorporated like organic shapes and curves into, and what inspired you to put an organic figure into your work with this piece specifically?
Let's see. I've done about 4 organic type of shapes, but then for more figurative, I don't know if I'd even call this a figurative piece. I've done 2. I tried to do 3, but it's ended up ripped twice.
Oh no.
Because I tried to make it one side, but it was too small. Because it's a lot to handle trying to do that much work in a very small form factor.
Yeah.
And then, what was your second question?
Yeah, I was wondering, like, what inspired you to do this figure for this piece?
So, as I mentioned earlier, I've been a photographer for a long time, and I took this photograph of my friend working on his album cover. And there was something about the photograph that I just needed to put it something, like, there was something in it that I could tell that there was it there, you know what I'm saying? There was it, and I wanted to also put that in a paint, like, I just wanted to see what it would look like, and then it just happened to be really nice for me, because I was like, oh, I could just do, because again, I want to play with the opposites. I can make it, you know, from black to white again on him, but it just didn't look right, so I needed to flip it, and it just became right. It's something like I needed to do.
Beautiful marriage, like mixing of the organic shapes with the geometry.
Thank you. Thank you. It's kind of, and it goes again with it's called there's a Latin term called coincidentia positorum, which is the union of the opposites. And that's, again, what I'm looking to do. Coincidentia positorum.
Use it in a sentence.
Harry Potter.
I don't know if I can spell it.
Any other questions?
I've been doing some work with the Energetics Institute, and I learned about a concept recently that's different than introvert versus extrovert, but it's internal versus external. So internals will source energy from the past, so they feel really comfortable with the past and they really draw from it. And then there's people who source energy from the future. And I think I have an idea of maybe what that would be reflected in you, but I was wondering if you feel more afraid of the past or more afraid of the future.
Well, see, this year I've been dealing a lot with the fact that I've lived in the past a lot, you know, and as much as and also this work really deals with meditation and coming to like be here now. But then again, I look back at it and I'm like, damn, I was still living in the past when I made this, and that's kind of, I haven't made this type of work in almost a year because I realized that I can't make it in the now. Like I can do it, but it's not quick enough for me. So I'm more afraid of the past because the past haunts you. The future never happens. So we should truly just look to be here now. But that question is very interesting, and but I'm very internal.
Any other questions? Yes.
Oh, why do you choose precision?
Why do I use precision?
Yeah, like why do you choose it? Like it's just so like, because all your work is geometric, so why precision then organic matters? Like you do it sort of incorporate here, but like for the most part it's just, you know, very meticulous.
I like to say that I don't choose it because again, I don't believe in free will. I think it chose me because when I go back and look at the first piece that I started painting 3 to 4 years ago, and it was a little square piece that I literally taped, and I did a rectangle, and then I made a smaller rectangle, and then a smaller rectangle. And so then I made more pieces, and then I just looked back at that thing and I was like, whoa, I keep doing this. And so I just
Why do you think it's attracted to you then?
I wish I knew. That's I wish that I knew, but there's a lot of things that I think should be left unknown.
Any other questions?
There's
Oh, is there one in the back? Okay.
Outside of just, I guess, what you were talking about, the motif of contrast and how that appeals to you, is there any specific inspiration or reasoning you think on why you went with like an achromatic color palette rather than incorporating any other colors, especially because it has so much shading in?
Good question. I don't always care for color. It can be really distracting. Like there's the psychology of color. It turns to be it's just very. in a world where we live in a digital age, we love color and we love really bright colors, and I wanted something that doesn't have to use that much color. I wanted to show you that you can do, because also I love black and white photography. I think that's some of the best photography that there is. And so I just wanted to incorporate it here because I don't want it to distract from what it actually is. Because I think color can be very distracting.
I agree with that. Is there any other questions?
I was gonna
Testing.
So, coming from a photography background, how do you think that really helped you within your work, like in the visuals that you create? And I don't know, for me, like photography, in my work or in like the work that I see, I don't normally go towards like geometric shapes. So why do you think, coming from a photography background, like basically how do those two kind of like marry each other? Like how did you get to this point from photography? How does it overlap for you?
Well, COVID happened and I realized that I didn't like working with people. Because I worked with people doing fashion photography and things like that, and it just was like, I love collaborating, but I hated working with some of the people that I was working with, and it tainted my view even of photography. So I stopped and I was like, let me focus on color. And weirdly enough, I went back to black and white because again, color's great, but then there's some things where you don't need color.
Yeah.
So then I went back and I realized I tried to do color studies, and then I just realized that just wasn't what I wanted to do. And then I just kept, and then I found a way to marry photography, because I was like, how can I, because I've done this for about 10 years now, how do I incorporate photography into my work so if I want to make a transition, it's more seamless? Because it's weird for people to see you go from a painter or a photographer to a painter to like an animator or this or that, and a lot of associate you with one thing, and I really hated being just associated with like a photographer or a painter. And so I'm trying to break that boundary.
Any other questions?
I do. So I noticed, or as I'm looking at it, it's that marriage of opposites and subconscious versus conscious. And one thing I find really interesting is they're made of the same thing. The self is enlarged. And then even, I understand the no free will argument. I think there's a really good argument for that. But then, and not to get too much into that, but because
that's a long discussion.
I can flow with that. I can understand that. And I'll tie it in. It's like, but do we, when we're looking at ourselves, have to enlarge ourself, our opinion, when we're made of the same thing as everything else? And you've got this yin yang energy. That's inverted. Is the ultimate question? Is there a reason? Was it intentional, accidental, or subconscious? The shapes, the inverted shapes inside are larger. Did that just?
Oh,
is that just how it turned out? Did I miss?
I guess he's asking the squares in the portrait, them being larger than the other ones, or is that intentional?
It was intentional because I didn't want it to get muddy. Because if they were the same size, you may not get enough, like, yes, they have enough contrast, but I didn't think it would hit right. It just needed to be a little bit larger so you could just tell that it was just.
For sure. Yeah.
I also feel like the fact that the squares are larger, they're closer to you. So you're closer to the subject.
Oh, interesting.
And that's interesting because a lot of people have talked about how when they look at like this type of work of mine, that the white background of black squares makes it feel more introspective, and then the opposite way is more what's the other word?
Extroverted. Okay. Any more questions for Austin? All right, please give a round of applause for Austin. That is the last talk. Thank you everybody for being here. I think